No mai haere mai, ko Shannon Dowsing toko ingoa. Welcome to the Exchange Cafe. At the Exchange Cafe we come together to share conversations and resources about climate solutions. We're fortunate to have Jordan Walker in the studio with us today, candidate for the Green Party for the East Coast electorate. Welcome Jordan.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, your ties to the community?
Hi, well, morena Shannon, thanks for having me this morning. Kia ora tātou. Ko mā tātua te waka, ko maunga pōhatu te maunga, ko waikare moana te awa, ko Ngāti Kuri te hapu, ko te Waiiti te marae, ko ngai tūhoi te iwi, he uri hau no Ngāti Kahungunu ki te Wairoa, no Ngāti Porou, no Ngai Te Rangi, no Ngāti Pākehā Hoki, ko Jordan Walker tōku ingoa. I've ties to this community because I grew up here. I grew up in Elgin. I've been here most of my life. I went away for several years to South Australia, but I came back. So I'm connected to the community through mahi and just through other avenues of advocacy.
Today we're focusing on the environment and climate change, and in particular your party's policies and how they'll impact the Tairāwhiti. As you know, under the Paris Agreement, New Zealand has signed up to ambitious targets, as well as, but we're unlikely to reach those at this stage. The science is telling us we have 6 years to at least half our emissions, and if we don't, we'll be caught in a runaway climate collapse. There's a high level of concern among New Zealanders, especially among rangatahi, and calls for more urgent and effective action. What's your party's commitment to climate action, and what plans do you have to halve our emissions in the coming 6 years?
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? It's really sort of scary and daunting, but I think it's important to acknowledge that the last 6 years of government that the Greens have been in government, they've actually made a huge impact on, for climate justice. That's compared to like 30 years of successive governments. Like the Green Party has actually implemented climate action, and we passed the Zero Carbon Act. We've sort of brought in stuff like the clean car discount, which has provided access for people to be able to, make a choice between driving something that's carbon emitting or renewable energy. We strengthened the emissions trading scheme, and through doing that, we got like our biggest polluters to fund that scheme. That's the same with the Climate Emergency Fund. We've sort of been working really hard within government, but our policies that are coming up currently that sort of help to push lowering carbon emissions, at least on a local scale, is the likes of our clean power payment, which, like the clean car discount, it provides access to whānau. So, it's $36,000 of interest-free loans and grants for people who own their own home to be able to have them insulated, to bring them up to like healthy home standards, insulation, solar panels, trying to electrify the whare so that we're moving away from gas. And that's all about access, because especially in our community, because we're so sort of entrenched with the cost of living and with poverty, people can't make sort of an informed choice or decision to want to do something that's good for the climate. And I feel that it's not until we're entrenched in a climate-driven disaster like Cyclone Gabrielle that people are aware of the climate emergency. So it's pathways of access that the Green Party are trying to implement to help people on a local level, but more broadly, it's, recently we stopped the coal burning in schools and in hospitals, and that's like millions worth of carbon emissions that have been cut because of that process. But it's so important that the Green Party have started, but it's only been 6 years, and we need more Green MPs in Parliament so that we can have a greener voice in government, so that we can push these things. There's huge fear that parties that might come into government will cut all of those things. They'll cut funding to the climate emergency. They'll cut funding to the Department of Conservation. They're not thinking about low-income people, which is, that's scary for our region. So we have our climate safe communities policy as well, and that's long-term planning, and that's working with councils locally to sort of implement infrastructure that's going to be able to withstand and work with climate-driven disasters, because we know that more floods are going to happen. I mean, it's raining now. People are panicked by that. So infrastructure that's like greenscaping and creating sort of sponge networks so that when it does flood, that, that ngahere, more in sort of in cities and in urban areas are able to soak up that water, so it's not all just flooding into the roads and going into our terrible drain network. And it's also implementing like $750 million worth of funding to be able to support communities on a local scale. But that's also in bigger meccas. It's like in Wellington, Christchurch and Auckland, it's light rail. So they're trying to provide access and transport for people so that they can make, again, a conscious decision to jump on a train or to jump on a tram in one of those bigger cities instead of getting in their car. And we've got the other parties who are advocating for building more roads, but we know that when you give people more roads, they fill it with cars, and it's still going to create traffic jams. It's not going to help anyone. It's just going to waste money. And then that money's going to have to, we're going to have more money to be able to repair climate-driven disasters and the impacts of climate-driven disasters. So it's like allocating funding in appropriate places. Yeah, I really like that policy.
Tairāwhiti is vulnerable in being severely impacted by climate change and severe weather. Our lifelines, including roads, water, power, communications, were all cut off in a single event this year. What will your party do to support the Tairāwhiti region to prepare for the impacts of climate change?
I think that stats at the moment, and I don't want to divert away from the climate emergency because it's obviously super important and it's a big, kaupapa for the Green Party, but stats are showing at the moment that most people are actually concerned about the cost of living. They're not as concerned about the climate emergency, and I think that ties back into what I was saying before, that if people aren't existing in a climate crisis, then they're sort of just thinking about the next thing, and that happens when you're entrenched in poverty. You only have the capacity to see so far, and that's like in your daily routine, going to mahi, getting your crumbs of pūtea to then go home, look after your kids, try and manage that amount of pūtea, or limited amount of pūtea that you have. So the Green Party is trying to uplift people out of poverty. And, we're trying to do that, and we're focusing on that through implementing a wealth tax that will see equitable redistribution of wealth within this country. And, it's terrible at the moment, right? We've all been hearing about this. 311 families who own a combined net worth of $85 billion. They don't pay their fair share of tax. A lot of that pūtea is tied up in capital gains as well, which is untaxed. And the Greens have done the mahi, it's evidence-based, it's costed. We've done the mahi to be able to show that we could redistribute that wealth, and we could pay for a number of things like free dental care for everyone, not just up until the age of 30, it's for everyone. Also for the income guarantee, which is like a universal basic income, so that anyone who is either out of work or in between jobs, they have that safety net, so it will be able to secure them so that they're not falling further into poverty. And having that sort of stability helps people sort of have the wairua to be able to be how can I help with, what good stuff can I do for climate action, because I have capacity to think beyond this wall of poverty, because we know it's a collective thing, we all need to be a part of it. Yes, it is. Making sure that we're, keeping our biggest industries like agriculture and transport, we're making sure that we're trying to lower their carbon emissions as well. But it's also everyday people. How can we all work together to be able to do that? And the Green Party know that it starts with poverty.
The ministerial inquiry into land use laid out a roadmap of recommendations to address immediate and long-term risks facing the region. Will you incorporate the recommendations from Outrage to Optimism report? And what would you look to fast track from that?
Yeah, we will. Fast tracking, I think the Green Party understands that there's a clear need to change forestry practices, but we also understand that it's a lot more difficult than that at a local level because there are so many hands involved. We acknowledge that trees shouldn't be fallen on steep, erodible, inclines. That, monoculture, obviously it isn't the best choice, and we shouldn't be clear felling those trees anyway, because we know that just leads to erosion, and when we have the likes of flooding, that just leads to landslips and the slash running into the awa as well. So the Green Party sort of supports native planting over exotic trees, but trying to leave them in there on the erodible soils so that they can't be cut down, to try and keep the structure of the soil and to regenerate that soil quality as well. The Green Party believes that councils need new revenue tools, such as targeted environmental taxes, congestion charges, resource rentals and tourism infrastructure levies, to better enable funding for local programs without relying solely on rates. We can't just expect the council to pick up the damages caused by what the forestry companies have sort of done to this region, and we know that they've lost their social license. So just by better supporting local government from central, we'd actually be able to hopefully start fast tracking some necessary processes for this region and for that industry. I mean, we know that a lot of our whānau live up the coast and they work within the forestry industry, so we know it's a matter of the a just transition into where else would they work if they weren't working in forestry, and how would we better be able to provide them with those jobs.
With the wide-ranging impacts on our community, it's clear we need to transition towards a sustainable economic future. So what does your party specifically want to do about that just transition for the region?
Our climate plan will create thousands of jobs and provide training opportunities and decent, secure work for those whānau. I'm just thinking about the likes of the clean power payments. So that's obviously moving into renewable energy, so there'll be more jobs in that sphere. Also with our climate safe communities policy, that also creates more jobs. So it's trying to reallocate people, not away from that industry, because obviously it's necessary, but there needs to be very strict measures in place to stop the likes of the slash that we saw in the recent floods happening again. But we know that it is going to happen again if they don't clean it up fast enough.
Businesses are under increasing pressure to reduce their carbon emission, and in return their impact on environment. How will your party support businesses to decarbonise?
I think that's the clean power payment again, and it sounds really simple, and I feel like I've been saying it a lot, but helping them decarbonise by moving them away from gas, from any fossil fuel burning sort of source of energy. It's giving them access to the likes of grants and interest-free loans so that they can choose to use solar panels. I think that that's a really simple but effective way of actually saying, this is one thing that the Green Party can do for your business, and it'll cut your energy costs as well. I've recently, my partner and I put solar panels on our whare, and it's ridiculous how much money you save from it, like hundreds of dollars a month. Yeah, it's aimed to be like several $100s over the year. So I think that would be really beneficial for a lot of businesses, small businesses especially.
Yep. We know that localised community-based energy projects are effective in cutting emissions. They increase regional resilience. For the likes of Cyclone Gabrielle, we saw the urgent need for those local systems, and some successful trials in our communities are taking place. How would your party help remove regulatory barriers and increase R&D into those community energy-based projects?
So the Green Party are looking at scaling up support for community energy solutions, including community and marae-based clean energy hubs with solar and wind generation, local markets, battery storage solutions, and peer-to-peer retail trading.
Great. Power companies are making record profits, and households are struggling with soaring power prices amongst all other prices at the moment. It was recently reported that our 4 biggest power companies had a combined earnings of $2.7 billion last year. What would your party do to accelerate the adoption of cleaner energy options such as wind and solar? And how will this benefit New Zealand households?
I feel like I've spoken about this.
Yeah.
But it is the clean power payment, just helping provide access to everyday people. And I know I can acknowledge that renters obviously won't have that sort of capacity, but that's where our pledge to renters policy comes in. And so that's a policy that looks at providing a rental warrant of fitness, so ensuring that landlords are keeping their whare up to healthy home standards, insulation, keeping it warm, dry, and that's not really sort of holding a gun to landlords' heads and being like, you have to do this, because we've also got this clean power payment that's going to help them be able to afford to do those things. So it's just like interlocking and helping the two. But then there's also the rental cap, so that ensures that anyone who's renting won't be thrown out by their landlord saying, hey, your rent's going up this month. It can only be like a 3% increase per year. So that gives renters assurance that they can afford to stay in a place and that it's going to be warm and dry. And it also supports landlords and homeowners so that they can actually make that conscious decision into clean energy.
We've committed to the global methane pledge, needing to cut 50% of New Zealand's net greenhouse emissions by 2030. What would your party do to support farmers reduce their agricultural emissions profile?
So we want to increase support for farmers to transition to more sustainable forms of agricultural production through finance mechanisms such as low interest loans and grants. But we need to acknowledge that because they're such a huge contributor to carbon emissions in the country, this also comes with having to try and help them phase out synthetic nitrogen fertiliser use in Aotearoa to protect the health of our waterways especially, and to reduce emissions. So I can acknowledge that our region is heavily farmers. It's either it's farmers and it's also low income whānau, and there's like a real obvious necessity to be able to work with the farmers because they're just trying to do their job. Like it's their generations of farmers, and they're arguably like the hardest working people within Aotearoa, and I know that they provide so much for our economy, but if we don't support them in ways like with these interest-free loans and grants, and actually on the ground, you know, helping them make that transition into regenerative agriculture, then we're not really meeting an agreement with them. We're not supporting them to be able to make those conscious choices. But also there's, you know, farmers, especially with dairy farming, all they need to do is reduce their productivity by 10% and they'll cut up to 30% of carbon emissions and they'll still make more money. So it's like mentally trying to, and this is across the board, get people to reduce their consumption. And that, like, culturally is such a hard thing to implement. But yeah, I'm going to a Federated Farmers Hui on Friday, and I know that with, you know, the ute taxes and stuff like that, the Green Party is not really the most popular party for them, but there's no other, like, we have to meet somewhere in the middle, because if we don't, then they're going to have an unstable climate and they're not going to be able to farm anyway. So yeah, what we can do about that, at the moment the Green Party is proposing interest-free loans and grants, but yeah, meeting with them sort of kanohi ki te kanohi and actually trying to sound them out, but you know, there are a lot of farmers who have done this, who have, like, are moving over into regenerative agriculture and into organics. And I watched a panel with like the farmers and agriculture panel. We had Eugenie Sage up there, but Damien O'Connor from the Labour Party was saying that economically, like with our trade, people actually want, like, where we're sitting at the moment is in organics, because we don't produce enough of, like, the milk or meats, like, on a global scale. Like, we only produce so much. And so if we want to sort of be really well known, then it should be for organics, and that can only happen if, you know, we have regenerative practices on farms.
This region is an example for all of New Zealand of the damage that planting monoculture pine, whether that be for forestry or carbon farming, can cause. It's resulted in unprecedented damage to our lands, waterways and biodiversity. How would you address the current ETS settings that financially incentivise the planting of monoculture pine over natives?
So that's through a biodiversity credit system to help protect important habitats and species by providing financial incentives to manage land in a way that benefits both wildlife and the local communities. You know, by purchasing credits, people and philanthropic organisations can finance and actively support nature-positive actions on public and private land, including whenua Māori.
You do support the development of a biodiversity credit as suggested?
Yeah.
Actually, we won't use that question. It's just the same question.
Well, can I add to that,
absolutely. Because
something happened recently?
Yeah.
So just on taonga species, recently in Pukekohe, a developer, Edifice Property Group, cleared an area of ngahere. And the Green Party, like, we responded pretty quickly to that, because it's wrong. Those trees were hundreds of years old. They didn't need to be cleared. Like, having ngahere in an urban area is good, because it reduces noise, it reduces car noise. Obviously, you know, it provides that sequestration for carbon as well. So we were very quick to respond, and so the Green Party actually wrote to the Auckland Council and the developer of Edifice Property Group, asking them to restore the cleared area and protect the remaining trees on the ngahere. So yeah, I mean, I know that replanting the trees that were hundreds of years old isn't going to resolve the fact that a property developer just went in and cut them down, but it's sort of us walking our talk as well, you know, like we are at the core activists. We just so also happen to be a political party.
Our waterways have been contaminated with excess nitrates, silt, runoff from farms, slash from forestry. They're no longer safe places for us to enjoy, collect kai or fresh water. What will your government do to restore the health of our waterways?
Our lakes, wetlands and estuaries are taonga, and you know they should be treated like that. But previous governments have failed to take action, you know, and we need to protect our waterways. Obviously they're really important. Like you said, I remember when I used to be able to swim in our awa out in Te Karaka, and I wouldn't do that now. That's that's dangerous. So the Green Party want to ensure regulatory frameworks for water management implement through Te Mana o Te Wai, with measures and funding to give effect to tino rangatiratanga of iwi and hapu and over waterways in their rohe. We want to protect all remaining natural wetlands and increase funding for their restoration, including estuaries and coastal wetlands, while providing for customary use of wetlands by Māori. We want to provide funding to support councils to implement a room for rivers approach, and this comes back to we were talking about the last time that you and I spoke for local body elections. It's this idea with the Waipawa River and building banks up around it, like that's gonna stop the flooding, but it's, like I said, it's a reactive way of responding. And you know, there's research that's been done by someone called Tom Kay from Forest and Bird around sort of moving with the awa and just providing space for it, because it is going to overflow. Rivers do that, they move all the time. So instead of trying to restrict it into place, which actually has a counter effect of, like, if it's so full, then the impact of it coming out is going to be so much greater than if we have forward planning and forward thinking with the likes of the Climate Safe Communities policy, where we're thinking about the future and, you know, potentially moving people who, and I'm just thinking about the Waipawa River at the moment, the agriculture areas around it, moving them away or trying to plant it in a way that's going to be good for the soil, but also, you know, moving people who have homes away. And that might come down to being able to fund local councils to be able to do that, to be able to work with people so that they're not directly in the path of a potential huge disaster. Yeah, we also have, we recently announced a Healthy Oceans Act, and that's our pledge to appoint a Green Minister of the Oceans, and to also to protect the oceans, at least 30% of the ocean by 2030, and that'll have a huge impact on the climate, for climate justice.
Are there any final points you'd like to make about your party's commitment to protecting and enhancing the environment and, of course, the combat of climate change?
Yeah, I think I just want to reiterate that over the last 6 years, the Green Party have done more for climate justice than successive governments have even come close to. It's thanks to the Green Party that we've actually been able to implement climate action that takes putia from our biggest polluters and redistributes it in a way where we can use that money for the likes of the Climate Emergency Fund, which was very helpful for our region recently. But, you know, we can't, like, we've only just gotten started and we need more time, and we can only do that with more Green MPs around the decision-making table, with more Green MPs within the select committees. And the only way that we can do that is trying to generate as much of a party vote for the Green Party as possible. So, you know, ko tēnei te wā, the time is now, and people need to be more forward-thinking and think about their kids and the future that their kids are going to be left with, and think, you know, we always like to say, think about your mokopuna and your mokopuna's mokopuna. Think beyond your lifespan, because this is the world that we're leaving them behind.
Well, ngā mihi nui, Jordan. It's been fantastic to hear your insights today and your party's position on climate change. And most of all, thank you for standing in our electorate. It's a thankless task, and yeah, it's a privilege to have good candidates to select from. All the best on the campaign trail.
Thanks.
Follow and contribute to the Exchange Cafe at exchangecafe.co.nz, because together we have the solutions. Mā te wā.